Hello everybody, my name is Steve.
My name is Navtej.
My name is Kristina.
And today we're going to talk about the 2008 financial crisis and Japan's monetary policy response to it. I will be talking about the context leading up to the crisis, as well as Japan's initial monetary policy response.
I will go more into depth about Japan's policy response during the crisis itself, along with the specific measures it took.
I will be talking about the policy response post-2011, namely Shinzo Abe's Abenomics.
The goal of this video is to argue that, though well-intended, Japan's monetary policy response failed to have a palpable impact on long-term price stabilization and has failed to also relieve Japan of their current situation.
This is not only due to their monetary policy, but also due to their cultural norms and other external factors such as the global economic climate.
In the specific case of Japan, analyzing their monetary policy response to the Great Recession requires an understanding of the policy measures leading up to it, because Japan has been operating with a strong monetary policy since the early 2000s. The Bank of Japan was given full policy independence in 1997 amidst the late 1990s recession, otherwise known as Japan's lost decade. Japan, like many other developed economies, was suffering as a result of global downturn in demand, precipitated by the Asian financial crisis. In response to deflationary pressures, the BOJ instituted its first near-zero interest rates to stimulate growth. However, they suffered from a liquidity trap in which, for a period of time, inflation failed to rise despite excess liquidity onset by these near-zero interest rates. In 2001, Japan instituted the first ever quantitative easing measure, injecting cash into the economy by using open market operations to reduce the low overnight call rate to zero, which means that banks were able to loan money to one another at an interest rate of zero, and the goal was to impel banks to loan money. This first round of quantitative easing ended in 2006 amid a strong recovery, but interest rates still remained near zero. Though many economists initially heralded Japan's boastful recovery, the wheels fell off around the time of the recession for reasons we explained in our previous video. These reasons range from cultural norms, that is, a savings culture, the persistence of zombie corporations, and a lack of competitiveness in the domestic market. All of these things were exacerbated by the stark reduction in exports. When the recession officially hit Japan in late 2008, the BOJ's response was a three-pronged approach to the stabilizing prices and the economy. The first step was to lower the interbank lending rate from 0.5% ultimately to 0.1%. The next was a series of measures to ensure stability in financial markets. And finally, a series of steps to facilitate corporate financing. The goal of this approach was to stabilize the economy, get rid of these zombie corporations and stabilize the ones that would make profits, and ultimately compel banks to give loans and incentivize spending, despite the poor economic conditions. All of this required a maintenance of near-zero interest rates and consistent injections of cash into the economy vis-a-vis open market operations, paired with the robust fiscal policy response. Navtej will now go into the specifics of the three-pronged approach, as well as the initial policies of Shinzo Abe.
Hi everyone, so we're going to go into a little more detail regarding Japan's three-pronged approach in response to the financial crisis, along with other structural reform efforts the government took to increase the productivity of their economy. The first of the three-pronged approach would be a reduction in interest rates, starting at 0.75% to 0.5% to eventually reaching 0.3% in the year of 2008. The Bank of Japan set a goal of reaching interest rates as low as 0.1%, and they achieved this in the middle of 2009. Subsequently, the second prong of this approach would be ensuring stability in financial markets. This included expansion in the range of what would be considered eligible collateral, along with the Japanese government purchasing more Japanese government bonds. The actual money spent on these government bonds by the government increased from 16.8 trillion yen to 21.6 trillion yen. Moreover, the government also started accepting bonds from foreign nations such as the UK, France, and Germany. Now, the third prong of this three-pronged approach would be facilitation of corporate financing. The introduction of expansion of operations to facilitate corporate financing was actually a big part of this, along with an expansion in the range of corporate debt, as I mentioned before, as eligible collateral. Moreover, the government also started purchasing corporate bonds in order to help the economy sort of gain traction in where it was sort of losing momentum in 2008. Now, a brief timeline of the recession and specifically looking around 2009 and 2010, shows that the Japanese government resumed purchasing stocks around 2009, and then they continued to pursue the goal of monetary easing, also known as quantitative easing, in 2010. Now, when you talk about their efforts for structural reform, this included a very broad reform package. This included corporate tax cuts, agricultural liberation, overhaul regulation of energy, and in the healthcare sector as well. Also, the government, as I mentioned before, started purchasing several classes of assets. These included commercial paper, corporate bonds, exchange traded funds, and real estate investment trusts. Lastly, although the expansion was large by the Japanese government in terms of the number of assets it was purchasing, or I guess the variety of assets it was purchasing, the value actually purchased of these assets was less than 2% of the Bank of Japan's real total assets. So it can be seen that although they were purchasing a wide variety of assets, they did not necessarily buy large quantities of them. And now we will have Kristina go more into depth about Abenomics specifically and his three-pronged approach.
Following his election in 2012, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe proposed a three-pronged approach termed Abenomics. Abenomics consisted of fiscal expansion, monetary easing, and structural reform. In the short term, Abenomics aimed to boost domestic demand and GDP and raise inflation to 2%. In the long term, it aimed to increase competition, reform labor markets, and cement trade partnerships. In conjunction with fiscal policy, the Bank of Japan injected liquidity into the economy. Structural reforms were taken, such as slashing business regulations and cutting corporate taxes. A major element of Abenomics was an unprecedented level of quantitative easing, in which the Bank of Japan doubled its balance sheet to raise inflation to 2%. In the second phase, there was a large buy-up of corporate debt, and the value of assets held by the Bank of Japan reached 57% of GDP by 2014. However, we now believe that the expansionary policy has not worked due to social norms and a savings culture in Japan. This, in turn, has led to a liquidity trap, in which inflation didn't rebound despite the large cash injections. This means that there is no incentive to invest, and investment has stagnated. As of November 16th, Japan has experienced great deflation. Despite long-term quantitative easing policies, there has been a negligible increase in demand. As a result, the GDP has contracted in recent years.
As we have shown through our video, we can reasonably conclude that Japan's monetary policy response failed to achieve the desired result of long-term price stabilization and continued and sustainable growth.
As such, we question the validity of quantitative easing and wonder if Japan's lost decade is going to turn into a lost quarter century.
Since its inception in Japan, quantitative easing has gained prominence worldwide. However, we doubt the effect that this will have on the worldwide economy in the future.
Thank you.
Have a good day.